could just mute yourself, whether you're familiar with Zoom or not. That would be great, just so we don't have any background noises or phones going off during the presentation. We'd like to start off, on time at 7:03. As folks filter in here, they can catch up, and we have recorded the Zoom conference for our guest, Dennis Vickers, this evening. So anything that we can miss, we can certainly recycle back on. So we'll get started. My name is Peter Alden, Director of ECC Tournaments, and we're really fortunate this weekend to be at Sacred Heart University, brand new multi-million-dollar facility that obviously hosts the men's and women's Division I ice hockey team for the Sacred Heart. And it's one of their first events that's in their building. And we feel very fortunate to be a part of their university for this weekend. So to kick off our College Hockey Showcase, which has been really designed for player exposure, development, education, and then really getting the players to understand their body a little bit more. We introduced yoga within our program this year as well. We're excited about the weekend. We're excited about the players that we have coming in from literally from all over North America, and hopefully you feel the same way. We feel also too, it's good to kind of slow things down, as some of the weekends can go by pretty quickly. And we had a soft opening, if you may. And Dennis Vickers, who's a director of player personnel for the North American League, has joined us this evening. He's a good friend of mine, very well trusted in the hockey circles, does an outstanding job within the North American League and also the NAHL. And any event, he's got some great advice, some good statistical measurements for players and families as you're navigating through the junior and NCAA process. So we had 3 topics that we wanted to point on, and certainly I know folks will have questions as we move forward. The best way to do this is just to put your questions within the chat, and I'll relay to Dennis with the questions that come about, and then he can answer them to the best of his ability. After the talk, I'll also provide his contact information. So if you have things that you want to kind of shoot offline to him to learn more about the North American League, we can certainly do that. So with that being said, Dennis, I'd love to give you the floor. Thanks for being here, and away we go here.
Absolutely. So happy to be here. Happy to do it. I'm going to start sharing my screen here. So that hopefully that shows up for everyone there. Again, like Pete said, we've known each other for a few years now through different coaching circles and things like that. So I appreciate the kind words and have similar feelings about him. It was always good to be at some of these different showcase events and coaching alongside him, but also against him over the years as well. So we always had some good games and some good rivalries. So that was always fun. But yeah, so I mean, as the director of player personnel, what does that mean? That means, so he touched on it a little bit. So I work a lot with our youth leagues. So we have our NAHL that works under the North American Hockey League umbrella, and our tier league and our showcase league and our fall league. We'll touch on some of that stuff briefly. But then also with working in the North American League, I'm responsible for our combines and really just working with our coaches and working with young players that are trying to get into the league. How do we get into the league? What are some different ways that you can do that? So I'll be touching on that a little bit during this presentation. So the last 10 years, prior to me taking this position in North American League, I was coaching a prep school team in Burlington, Vermont. And then prior to that, I was the youth hockey director, actually where I am right here now in Nashville, and helped start our junior Preds program that's going on here. So I'm at another event and actually just gave a couple more of these presentations just before then. So it's always good to, get out there and make sure this information is out there to the players and to the parents. I know there's sometimes junior hockey can be a scary thing, and we want to make sure that we try and make it less scary and obviously accessible, as far as understanding that process for our players. So as you see here, like within the North American Hockey League, our goal is to try and get kids to college. So they're playing college hockey. That's our goal whenever you enter the North American Hockey League. I'm going to assume that a lot of the players that are participating this weekend are somewhere, in this part of the ladder where they're playing whether it's a prep school, whether it's a AAA or AA, you're starting to really try to feel your way through this junior hockey process. And not only what does it look like, but what does it look like for you? And then again, hopefully we can answer some of those questions as we go through the presentation today. But again, as far as the North American Hockey League is concerned, with us being a league of opportunity, our goal is to have our players playing college hockey. So we want to make sure that that's kind of definitely at the forefront of our not just our coaches' minds, but our players' minds and our owners' minds and things like that, as they're part of the North American Hockey League. Obviously in junior hockey, there are primarily 3 tiers. So there's the USHL, which is tier 1 junior hockey, a long-term partnership with USA Hockey. It's a free league to play in. There's no expense to play in the league. There's no expense for host family fees. The equipment for the players is free in the USHL. In the North American League, similarly, there's no tuition to play in the North American Hockey League. We are a tier 2 junior hockey league. This is our 48th season. Next year will be our 49th season. Again, long-term partnership with USA Hockey. So that's always helpful whenever it comes to some different things we'll talk about more primarily with the tier 3 level. But again, the North American Hockey League is no tuition. We provide equipment for the players, helmets, gloves, pants, sticks, all the equipment that you see, the outer equipment, is provided by those teams and those organizations. And then the NA3, again, is run and operated by the North American Hockey League. We just completed our 13th season, moving into our 14th season next year. It is a tuition-based league, so it's a pay-to-play league. And we'll talk through some different ways in how the North American Hockey League, the NA3 helps transition players into the North American Hockey League. And then similarly with our NAPHL, more specifically with our tier league, our 14th season, next year will be our 15th season, exclusive player procurement into the North American Hockey League. Again, we operate the NAPHL, our tier league, our show league. So it adds that extra layer of professionalism, of advancement, and again, trying to help those players continue to move up the path, continue to move up the ladder into the North American Hockey League, and then ideally into college. So, I mean, obviously this says combine, but you're here at a college showcase, right? So why are the reasons that you're here? And I was actually happy to hear Pete discuss a few of those right away. Like, obviously, a lot of these different showcases and a lot of these different events that players participate in over the summers are going to be for exposure reasons. But at the end of the day, if you're just going for that exposure, you're missing out on a tremendous experience and a tremendous opportunity, right? So something that we talk about in our combines, but again, really can be applied to any showcase or any event kind of structured similarly how he has it here. Number one is going to be that education, and not necessarily like, obviously sitting in a math class or a science class or something like that, but more learning about yourself, right? So he mentioned you guys have players there from all over North America. Same thing, the event that, is going on here in Nashville, there are players from all over the Southeast. We have players from, Canada, Europe, wherever, that are all here for these different events. And you're able to gain that education of not necessarily where you just stack up in Connecticut or Rhode Island or Vermont or Maine, but you can see where you kind of stack up in New England and stack up in the Northeast and stack up against some of these players. And then also gaining that experience, right? So we mentioned early on how a lot of these players that are here are still navigating that junior process and what it looks like. So ultimately, when you finish up your, whether it's prep school hockey or U18 hockey, or maybe even U16 hockey, and you're trying to navigate that junior hockey experience, when you show up at Corpus Christi's main camp, that's not the first time that you've been, at an event like this, right? Where, like, similar to the event that he has going on, I'm sure he has a lot of great coaches. I think I saw Coach Corbett from Quinnipiac and a few other guys that are Division I coaches, Division III coaches, guys that are bringing a lot of different experience to the table. So when you go to these events, tap into some of these guys, right? Kind of put yourself out there a little bit, get outside your comfort zone, and really start to make that your experience. Like, obviously, mom and dad help out through the process. Mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, whoever it may be, help you through the process. But then once you get there, once you get to these different events and you get to these different combines and camps and things like that, showcases, it has to be your hockey journey. It has to be your experience. So starting to gain that education about the process, gain that experience, so that when you go to a main camp or when you go to a tryout camp, it's not the first time you've ever done something like that. And then finally, again, like he mentioned, we have these different events to help you gain that exposure and help you gain, the ability to be seen by these coaches and be on the ice with some of these coaches. And as far as the NA experience goes, I tell this story all the time. Like 22 years ago, when I was, obviously not necessarily on the other side of the Zoom call, but, sitting in meetings like this and, talking to coaches and people similar to myself. One of the things is I had a lot more hair at that time, but something else is our league has really grown from its original footprint. So originally we started kind of as a Midwest and South-based league. Over the last few years, what you've seen is a lot of transition to the East Coast with our league. And our league has been very successful with teams such as the New Jersey Titans and Northeast Generals and Maine Nordiques kind of having that success, and being able to in Maryland this year, being able to help kind of pave the way for more teams in the Northeast and New England to grow and develop within our league. So we're adding 2 teams in our Northeast division next year. We're adding the New Hampshire Mountain Kings. We're adding the Rochester Americans. And you also see a little bit of westward expansion with us as well. We've always had these teams out in Alaska with Fairbanks and Anchorage and Kenai. But in the last couple of years, this year we're adding the Colorado Grit. 2 years ago, I believe we added New Mexico and El Paso. So I think you'll start to see us creeping a little bit more west as teams like Arizona State and some of those others start to become more and more popular, and kind of gain that traction in the NCAA footprint as well. So when you're at events like this, we started to talk about it a little bit, but how do you get noticed, right? How do you kind of take advantage of that exposure that mom and dad and grandma and grandpa are helping you with? And that's by reaching out to teams, reaching out to coaches, right? So again, kind of taking that ownership of your hockey journey, right? So with us having our players' goal is to play college hockey. Again, that has to be your goal, and that has to be something that you take ownership of, right? So I was actually at one of our combines in St. Louis, and I was in the coach's room talking to some of our coaches, and one of the coaches said, "Hey, I got to take off over to rink 3. There's a kid that's been emailing me that I think could be a good fit, and so I want to go check him out." And there was another coach sitting there. It's like, "Oh, hey, what's the kid's name? I want to, I'll go with you." And, he said the kid's name. He's like, "Oh, that kid emailed me too." And then another coach was sitting there. He's like, "Oh, that kid emailed me too." So we have 32 teams in North American League. You don't want to email all 32 teams, right? You don't want to email all 32 teams. You don't want to go to 32 different pre-draft camps or anything like that. So that's what we were talking about. You have to kind of take the ownership of that experience, right? So in the North American Hockey League this past season, O2s were players that aged out and were moving on to college hockey for the most part. So next year's players will be O3s that age out, right? So if I'm an O5 goalie and I'm looking around and I see that the St. Cloud Norsemen have 2 O4 goalies, well, that might not be a team that I reach out to because it's going to be a waste of time, right? So maybe Bismarck Bobcats, maybe they have an O3 and an O4. So there might be that opportunity where that player is aging out and have an opportunity for someone such as myself as an O5 to try and step in and make the team next year, right? So do a little bit of research, do a little bit of homework on your own. And again, take ownership of that experience. Don't just email every team in the league, seeing who responds to you. And again, kind of along those lines as well, myself being the director of player personnel now, and when I was coaching prep school hockey, I'm sure Pete has the same thing. Like, we get inundated with emails, phone calls, text messages. And I think we do a good job of staying on top of it, but it definitely does get hard, right? So if a coach doesn't email you back right away, that doesn't necessarily mean he's not interested. But that's just, maybe continue to stay in touch. "Hey, coach, just checking back in." So you don't have to send them an email every single day, but if you go a couple, 3 to 5 days, you're not hearing back from a coach, it's okay to reach back out to them, right? Then when you're at some of these different events, obviously you're putting yourself in the path of scouts and coaches that can see you play, that can see you perform. You're attending the tryouts, you're attending the showcases, the combines. But when you're there, you have to perform. You have to make an impact, right? And obviously everyone's going to try and score as many goals as they can, but that's not necessarily going to be the key to helping you get noticed, right? If I'm a defenseman that plays strong in front of my net and wins all the battles in the corner, if I'm trying to skate the puck end to end just to try and score a goal, that might not be something that I do well, right? So that might hurt my performance, right? So stick to the things that you do well, right? Stick to those things you do well, do those well day 1, build on it day 2, continue to work on that. And then those additional opportunities will come from there. Same thing. If I'm a playmaking center that does a good job of setting up my teammates, I don't need to go try and score 10 goals, right? Just keep making the plays, keep making the tape-to-tape passes, and players and coaches and scouts will take notice. But along those lines as well are other separation factors. So obviously when you get invited to a showcase like this, everyone's going to be able to skate, everyone's going to be able to stick handle, everyone's going to be able to shoot. But having those separation factors in other aspects of your game are going to make that much more valuable to teams and to coaches. So what are those separation factors? Being a good teammate, right? Being a good teammate, being someone that's going to be positive on the bench. If you have a teammate that gives you a bad pass, you're not throwing your arms up in the air. What the heck was that? Right? You're not banging your stick when you come back to the bench. Another separation factor is how you conduct yourself around the rink, right? Are you eating lunch and leaving your trash all over the rink? Are you picking your trash up? Are you, doing what you're supposed to be doing off the ice, away from the rink? Are you working hard in the weight room? Things like that. And then finally, probably the biggest separation factor is going to be grades, right? So there's 63 NCAA Division I schools. And if you get straight A's, you're eligible to get into 63 of them. If you get B's, now all of a sudden you're eligible to get into 45 of them. If you get C's, now that goes down to 20 or 25, right? So one of the biggest separation factors that you can have is just being a good student, right? On top of being a good person, being a good teammate, working hard, but being a good student. When our job is to try and get you to college, it doesn't do your coaches or the organization or the team or the league any good if you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing in the classroom as well. So making sure you have those separation factors. So getting into the player procurement a little bit here. So I'm going to skip from the protected list here for a second. So every North American Hockey League team is provided with 10 tenders. 7 of those tenders can be used on players, any player that they want that are junior hockey eligible that are not currently signed to a North American Hockey League team, right? So we just had our NAHL draft, and tenders are league and team specific. So if I sign a tender with the Maryland Black Bears, that is the only team in the North American Hockey League that I can play for if I'm playing in the North American Hockey League, unless I get traded or released or whatever it may be. Can you sign a tender with an NA team and an NA3 team? Yes, but same thing. If you're playing in the NA3, you sign a tender, that's the only team in the NA3 that you can play for you. So you can't sign tenders for more than one team. Same thing for the draft. We just had our NAHL draft yesterday. And every team, kind of going back to topic number 1 here. So every team is allowed to protect 28 players, right? So our teams are allowed to protect 28 players. They get 10 tenders. Let's say they have 10 players that are veterans that are returning. So that means they have 8 players that they can draft to max out their protected list. Okay. So that's why if you were tuning into the draft yesterday, I'm just using random numbers. That doesn't mean that's the case for every team. Some team, and there are ways for our teams to get additional tenders, things like that. I don't want to get too much in the weeds yet, but that's why if you were watching the draft yesterday or looking at the results of the draft, you'll see some teams in like round 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 that it says pass and they didn't draft anybody. That's because their protected list had maxed out, right? So there's some teams that only had the ability to draft 4 players because they had, let's say they had, 14 kids that were returners. They had their 10 tenders, so they could only draft 4 players. Now, does that mean if you're not tendered or you're not drafted, you can't make a team? Absolutely not. Right. So I had a few coaches, again, at some of our combines, our coaches were saying, I had this kid that I tendered. I had another kid that I drafted, and they're saying, hey, coach, I can't make main camp this year. And he's like, well, if main camp, you can't make the team. Right. So they're definitely, just because you're tendered, just because you're drafted, you still have to try out and you still have to make the team. Right. So there's still that additional piece. So just because you're not tendered, just because you're not drafted, doesn't mean you cannot make a North American Hockey League team. Does it make your job a little bit harder? Yes, right? Because these other teams have expended hockey capital on these players, right? They've expended draft picks and tenders when you're only allowed a certain amount. So there is that form of commitment to those players. But just because that team commits to you, you still have to make that team out of camp. And then finally, affiliate players. Typically, affiliate players, well, in our league, because we have the NA3, teams are able to affiliate NA3 players. They're able to affiliate youth hockey players, but those affiliate players cannot play more than 10 games. So it was actually kind of crazy. Amarillo, they were on the outside looking in for playoffs, and, you know, they brought up one of their goalies at the end of the year, and this guy rattled off. He came in relief and played one game, and the coach is like, "Oh, we're gonna give him an opportunity to play another game." And the goalie goes and rattles off 9 wins in a row, and they make playoffs. But then because he had played in 10 games, that was the max amount of games that he could play in. So yes, as an affiliate player, you don't necessarily count towards the 24-man roster during the season. And it's an opportunity for you to get called up and play and participate, but you're only allowed to participate in those 10 games. Again, with us trying to, help players develop and move on to college, our coaches are spending a tremendous amount of time with these players on the ice, with off the ice, 4 days a week practice. Typically practice is going to be about an hour and a half or so. Some teams will do 2 hours. So you're looking at about 6 to 8 hours worth of practice every week. The majority of the teams, we have 32 teams in our league. The majority of those teams are going to have workout facilities on campus. Some of them, I say on campus, on the grounds of the like the rink that they play out of. But some do not, but they do have that strength and conditioning aspect as part of their program. And then also video and data analysis is becoming more and more important at every single level. I know we used it at the prep school level for the last 10 years, but I know our junior hockey teams are implementing not just video, but kind of looking into some of those higher level stats and really trying to analyze some of the data from the games that their players are participating in. So not only are you getting the 6 to 8 hours a week of on ice development through practice, but we have the off ice coaching that's happening throughout the season as well. Speaking of season, it's a 60-game season, runs from September through April. Our Robertson Cup is our championship, finishes kind of mid-May. Majority of the games are going to be Friday and Saturday nights. Some of our East Coast teams, being a little bit closer, will play a weekday game here or there, but for the most part, it's going to be Friday and Saturday night concentrated games. And then again, when your goal and the team's goal is for kids to get to college, you're going to have that elite competition every single day in practice, right? Your teammates are pushing each other, pushing you, because they want to be prepared whenever they, finish their junior hockey career to step into an NCAA program and be ready to compete and be ready to, have an impact. With 32 teams in the league, all of the teams are going to have different facilities. That being said, all of our teams are going to be a professional atmosphere, right? So the average attendance is about 11 to 1,200 fans per game. That being said, you could play in a place like Corpus Christi here. That's a former minor league arena that seats, I think it's 6,500 fans, and you can see that every seat's filled. Also, we have some like Fairbanks. Fairbanks, their arena only seats 2,200, but every single game they have that place sold out. right? All of the facilities, all the teams have a dedicated year-round locker room where the players are able to keep their equipment. And again, and like I mentioned, it's a professional atmosphere. So these teams are there and they're putting on a show, right? Just like any, professional game, they're going to have different things that they're doing at intermission. They might have a hot dog night. They might have a t-shirt cannon. They'll have, video replay, light show for goals, things like that. Excuse me. So it's, first class professional atmosphere with all of our organizations and all of our teams. Equipment, our teams provide equipment for the players. Like I mentioned, helmets, gloves, sticks, pants, all that equipment that our teams provide is Bauer. That is our official equipment provider for players. For jerseys, our official jersey provider is K1. Like I mentioned earlier, with us having different organizations, but also having that professional atmosphere, some of our organizations will have like military appreciation, or maybe like a Valentine's Day night, and have like some specialty jerseys or a Christmas jersey and auction some of those off. So they'll have different specialty items like that. But all of those are provided through K1. We do not have an official goalie equipment sponsor, but we do have a goalie stick sponsor, which is True. Does that mean you cannot use CCM or Warrior or another hockey equipment? That does not mean that. You can use that equipment. You just have to have the label blacked out. And that would be a piece of equipment that you have to pay for. So our teams wouldn't pay for a CCM stick. They're only able to pay for a Bauer stick. One of the great things, and actually I was just talking to some of our coaches that are here at this event about the ownership in our league. Like our owners of the 32 teams, 32 owners in the league, the majority of those owners are coming from right there within those different 32 communities. So community service is a huge thing for the teams. It's a huge thing for those ownership groups, making sure that, again, kind of going back to the separation factors, that these players are more than just hockey players, that they're good students, that they're good people, they're volunteering, they're doing school visits, they're being a good billet family at the host families. They're doing different community service projects around town. So all of our teams, all of our owners are invested in the community and making sure that their teams are invested in the community. But again, when you're the league of opportunity and you talk about moving kids on to college, with that being our number one focus, our opening showcase in September is the, kind of the ultimate, like, kind of showcase weekend, right? Like that weekend we have all 32 of our North American Hockey League teams that are there. We have the U.S. National Development Program that is there. We have 100 of our youth teams that are there. So at the end of the day, we have roughly, 140 hockey teams that are there playing in front of 350 scouts over the course of the weekend. So every NHL team is there and represented. NHL Central Scouting is there represented. Every, Division I program, every Division III program are all there at our opening showcase in September. Moving on, our next most scouted event would be our Top Prospects Tournament, which is in February. It kind of operates more as like an all-star game, but operates as an all-star game for the players that are not yet committed, right? So all the players that are participating in the league that are not committed by an NCAA program would participate in the Top Prospects event. And again, having over 250 scouts at that event is a huge benefit to our players that are able to participate in that. And then finally, like I mentioned, our Robertson Cup is our championship at the end of the year. Typically at that one, over 100 coaches and scouts that are there, maybe looking for a player that transferred late or maybe went into the portal or maybe decommitted, whatever it may be, just trying to go and see if there's anyone that's left that still has an opportunity to develop and play at the college level. So along those lines as well, last year in the North American Hockey League, we had 363 NCAA Division I, NCAA commitments, with 272 of those commitments being Division I. So it's becoming more and more rare that players move on from U18 hockey or prep school hockey right into NCAA hockey. 38% of freshmen in NCAA played in the North American Hockey League. And kind of going back to it as well, like how we tag ourselves as a league of opportunity. Last year, at the beginning of the season, of those 363 commitments, 63 of those players actually came in committed before the season. So we had 300 players that committed during the year. So there's not a lot of other leagues that can say they have over 300 players that committed to play college hockey last year. With us, same thing this year. We have over 300 kids right now, just over 300 kids right now that have committed, with still a few months left in the summer. There's usually some late commitments that'll be rolling in here soon. So I think that's, I heard in the office the other day, this is 7 years in a row of us having 300 plus NCAA commitments. But again, in the North American Hockey League, obviously moving kids on to college, but more importantly, kind of having that dual advancement path, right? So we're able to have these kids that play in the North American Hockey League that move on to play college hockey at some of these various schools, but also we have players that are moving on to play in the USHL as well, right? So I mentioned that at the very beginning. So you have the USHL, which is Tier 1 junior hockey. And so we're not afraid to, if we have players that have an opportunity to go and play in the USHL, we want those players to go and be successful, right? If that helps them with their path to college. But primarily, the USHL players are committed prior to them getting to the USHL. Here are a few notable alumni from the North American Hockey League that are in the NHL. We've done a great job with goalies in our league, helping them move on to the National Hockey League and playing in the NHL. And then quickly here, I think I've been going for a little bit, so I'll touch on the NA3 here. As I mentioned earlier, the Tier 3 league or Tier 3 junior hockey used to have several different leagues under its umbrella. The only remaining USA Hockey Tier 3 junior league is the NA3HL. And why is that? Again, when our goal is to try and move players on to college, there are some leagues in other areas that didn't like some of the restrictions that USA Hockey had on them as far as with roster sizes and things like that, right? So with us, our team's rosters are capped at 24 during the season, right? So when you're trying to develop, you're trying to move on and play college hockey, your roster's capped at 24, whereas some other Tier 3 junior leagues, they cap their rosters at like 28, right? So from our perspective, that's not doing a whole lot of developing if you're the 27th or 28th player on that roster, right? If you're the 20, when you're able to dress 22 guys and you're player number 23, 24, you're still going to get that opportunity, as opposed to, when you're dressing 20, 21, 22 guys and you're still, player number 27 or 28, you just have that much more room for development and growth playing in the NA3 as opposed to other Tier 3 leagues. Again, as far as direct advancement to the North American Hockey League, we'll start to get into some of that here in a second. The footprint, very similar, Midwest and Southern based. Again, we've seen some of the teams on the East Coast be successful, and we've seen some of this growth West with our Frontier League, and a lot of those teams growing as well. In the NA3, we mentioned the NA has its own showcase in September. Our NA3 teams have their showcase in December. That works out because it's right around Christmas. And a lot of those Division III schools are shut down for the holidays. And so those coaches and those scouts are able to get to Blaine and see the NA3 showcase. Our NA3 guys also participate in our top prospects tournament. And then they have their championship, which is the Fraser Cup, that usually runs in conjunction with our combines in St. Louis. But again, kind of going into player procurement in the NA3. So again, some teams and some leagues will say, hey, we want you to come and play here so that you can play for this team later. Whereas again, when you have 28 or so guys on a roster, that's not really that accurate, right? It's hard to move up and take that spot when there are that many more guys on the roster. Whereas in the NA, we actually incentivize our teams and incentivize our organizations for bringing players from the NA3 up to play. So I mentioned tenders earlier, how every team is provided with 10 tenders at the beginning of the season. We have ways for our teams to earn additional tenders. One of those ways for them to earn an additional tender is through our play and practice program that we use with our NA3 teams. So if an NA team calls up 3 players from 3 unique teams, they can earn an additional tender. By showing up and scouting some of our different AAA and tier events, they can earn an additional tender. By having players, so I mentioned if you have 3 players from 3 unique teams come and play in practice, you can earn a tender. If you have 5 players from 5 unique organizations and teams come up and play in practice, you can earn an additional draft pick. So just having that hockey capital, really trying to promote our players that are in our league, that are in the umbrella of the North American Hockey League, and again, helping them continue to climb those ladders and climb those steps into moving on to college hockey. So what you see here are some players that played in the NA3 that moved on to the NA and then moved on to Division I hockey. So again, kind of going back to that dual advancement path, right? So just like the NA wants kids to move on to play in college and move on and play in the USHL, same thing in the NA3, those coaches want players to move on and play in college or move on and play in the North American League. And I've been going pretty good for a while there, huh, Pete? About 40 minutes or so. So I will stop there kind of with the junior hockey talk. I think that was kind of the main focus. But hopefully, again, I know that a lot of parents and a lot of players kind of starting that junior hockey process and starting to navigate that from, again, the tenders and the draft picks and some of those different perspectives. What does it all mean? Pre-draft camps, main camps. So we know it can be a lot to take in. So that's why I'm happy to jump on and do some of these different presentations and talk to players and work with coaches and organizations that do a good job and put good information out there. So hopefully that answered a lot of questions that you guys may have had about junior hockey or the steps or the process. And because I've been sharing my screen, I've been focusing on the kind of going off of my presentation. But if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys may have as well.
Yeah, so if you guys have any questions, you want to put them into the group chat, we can certainly read them aloud. But Dennis, thank you for your information. It was outstanding. It's a lot of it too.
Yeah, it's, it's one of those things, like I said, you can definitely, get caught in the weeds a little bit, but so we try and put some simple numbers together as far as, again, with the protected list at the end of the season and during the season, and really try and break down the tenders and the draft picks and what it all means. And so hopefully that answered some questions. And again, don't be shy. If you have questions, ask them, or like Pete said, he can definitely give you my contact information as well.
Yeah, I just have one too. It's when kids are going through this process, the North American League is really attractive. I played in it for Springfield back when, and I loved it. It's a great developmental league. It's tough. It's super organized, as you had a lot of good touching points here too. Do you, like, with the process, like, they don't get to get their name out there, right? Because if I want to go play in Amarillo and I'm from Connecticut, do I try to go to a NAHL combine that's more centrally located to that program? Like, how do I kind of get my name out there to that coach beyond just an email? Trying to get into their main camp. I'm not drafted. I'm undrafted, and I'm a good player, but I'm just trying to get out to like you said, those specific programs that you really take interest in. Is there any like advice that, just as far as the logistics go? Because I mean, we have kids from Alaska coming in this weekend, and South Carolina and all that stuff. So it can be kind of a really tricky process just based on logistics too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we actually limit the amount of camps that our teams can have. So I believe it is 4 camps kind of leading up to their main camp, through pre-draft camps and things like that. I would say that a lot of our teams as well do a good job of combining camps. So that's something that you see more and more of now, whereas 3 or 4 teams or organizations will put on like a bigger camp. So there's pros and cons to all of those different things. What I always encourage players to do is, you're going to get a ton, like, just like we asked you to email those coaches are going to get your information, and you're going to get a ton of emails from them as well. And it's important for you to sift through some of that as well, and ask some of those questions as far as, okay, for this pre-draft camp, how many teams worth of players are you bringing in? Are you bringing in 4 teams worth of players? Are you bringing in 8 teams worth of players? Are you bringing in, primarily 04s, 05s? Are you bringing in some 06, 07s? So start to ask some of those questions as you're going through the process. What I hate, and I think our teams hate this as well, is when something gets labeled as that camp was just a moneymaker or whatever it is. Yeah. And honestly, you could probably say that about almost anything, right? If you don't know what you're getting yourself into. If you get an email for a pre-draft camp and just sign up, then yes, it was just that, because, right, maybe the coach doesn't have that knowledge or that experience with the player. So it's okay to turn that back around. Okay, coach, you emailed me about attending this pre-draft camp. What is it that you think about me that I can help your team, or I have a chance to get drafted out of this pre-draft camp, or I have a chance to make the team out of main camp as a free agent. But yes, so I think we do a good job of limiting the amount of camps that our teams are able to have. As far as, again, there's always going to be something that you can do, as far as different camps and things like that. I would always try and defer to the camps where more people are going to have more eyes on you, right? Like, so going, obviously, selfishly, being someone that organizes the NA combines, like, we pay for our coaches and our scouts to come in and watch those, right? So we bring in, and coaches, again, get incentivized for coming to those camps as well. So they show up to 2 combines, they get an additional tender, right? So we pay for their travel to come in, and it's essentially a free tender for them. So going to, if you're a kid from Connecticut, going to a combine in Attleboro where you're going to have 25 or so NA teams and coaches and scouts there watching you, that's, a little bit more bang for the buck, right? As opposed to signing up for a pre-draft camp where maybe it's just that team that's there watching, right? So kind of getting more eyes on you for that experience. I would definitely recommend that. But like I said, there's also more and more, like I know that I think it was like Austin and St. Cloud and Chippewa, and there was one other team, maybe Fairbanks, that and they're not the only ones that do this, but I know I was just talking to some of their coaches. They just had, before the draft, they had an event. Those 4 teams had an event in Michigan, and then they had an event in Vegas, right? So being able to have, now you have 4 teams that are there looking at you, right? So just the more eyes, the better.
Yeah, that's great advice. It really is, as families and players pick and choose, just even financially, just to, planning out their roadmap for the summer and just trying to find the events with, the most exposure. And I think, the feedback and so forth that you get out of that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but you've done an unreal job. Our listeners here, have been on close to an hour or two, which is great. But I mean, seriously, that's awesome. Yeah. You did a great job because everybody's, still locked in.
Yeah, so they're still there, I hope.
Yeah.
Either that or they passed out and they just turned the camera off. One of the two. So I did get one question here. It was more in reference to education and what do kids do for education during the junior hockey season. I will say typically in the North American Hockey League, we are an older league. So our league is typically, the average age in our league is 19. So a lot of those players have already graduated high school. We do have a partnership with an online academy because, again, a lot of our teams are practicing during the day. So they're usually getting to the rink around 9:30, hopping on the ice at 10, doing weights, getting some lunch. So it's kind of a 9 to noon or kind of like a 10 to 2 type of day for those players. So if they do have players that are in high school, some of them will either start the day at the high school and then finish with like an academy model. Some of them will do just an academy model. But there's also opportunities for those players that are finished with high school to do to take a couple of classes through Adentum, which is our online academy that we use. So
awesome. Any more questions here for Dennis? All right, my man, you're off the hook.
Perfect. Sounds good.
If you're okay with it, we'll have just a follow-up email, a little recap.
Yeah, absolutely.
Put your email down, and families, just maybe want to shoot a line off, obviously off camera here.
Yeah,
a little bit easier, and then digesting the information too, which would be good. But appreciate your time and your efforts and your support here. And all of this is great information for these young players, working hard to get to the next level here too.
Absolutely. Good luck with the weekend. I'm sure it'll be well organized and well run. But take advantage of it, and let me know if you guys need anything else.
Cool. Thanks, Ben. We'll talk to you soon.
Perfect. Thank you.
See you, pal.